If you could only have one lens for Fujifilm, what would you pick? I know what I'd pick. It's not the most exciting choice, but it's the right choice. It's the 16-55 f2.8. For the longest time, I dismissed it. I claimed I didn't need one and all that. I've also decided against getting something like the 16-55 2.8 because I really like doing natural light shots, and any extra shots of light that I can get are much appreciated. I even bought a Sigma 18-50 thinking I could make do without it. And I'll tell you what, guys, I was wrong about this lens. This lens is so good, it's boring. The 24-70 full frame equivalent focal length is a quintessential and very useful lens that exists on every single camera system ever. And this is Fuji's crack at it. And what a good crack it is, because this is the sharpest zoom I've ever used. I had heard all the talk of this being some big bag of primes, and I just dismissed those claims, but no, this really is as sharp as Fuji's own excellent f2 primes in my opinion. The 1.4s still edge it out, but damn, the f2s are still very impressive. In this video, I'll share some samples taken with this lens, and stick around till the end to hear all my thoughts about this essential bit of kit. But here's the thing, it's not just sharp. The Sigma 18-50 is sharp too. Probably just about as sharp as this Fuji variant, but in areas where it trumps the hell out of that Sigma lens is AF performance, build quality, and focal length. Also, be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see more great photography content. Beginning with the most important distinction, the AF performance on the 16-55 is unmatched. It helps that Fuji keeps putting out firmware updates for it too, as it clearly is their hero lens still for professionals, but this fairly old lens has blisteringly quick linear motors that aren't just fast, they're accurate too. The AF performance is, in my opinion, almost as good as the brand new 18mm 1.4WR, which I previously believed to have the most flawless AF motors on the Fuji system, but this really comes close. The best bit though, is its autofocus performance in video. So for the longest time, I used manual focus when shooting video because autofocus performance, even with the 18-1.4WR, was just not reliable enough to trust when shooting video, which was annoying when, shooting footage of myself, for example. But the 16-55, damn, this thing just sticks and stays on target with ease. One of my biggest gripes with the Sigma 18-50, and honestly why I got rid of it in the first place, is its absolutely dreadful video autofocus performance. That thing literally hunted worse than a blind hunter during duck season. It was actually awful. It could never properly get the scene I actually wanted in focus, and thus I always needed to use manual focus with its dreadfully thin focus ring that was on the back of the lens. For photos, the autofocus on that lens is fine, but God, it sucks for video. Next up, let's talk build quality. So this thing is built well. Everything feels really, really nice and tight. It's entirely weather sealed, and the lens feels like it's built to withstand a mountain of abuse. The aperture ring is tight, and thank God it actually has one because the Sigma doesn't, and it sucks not having one. Being a red badge Fuji zoom, this really is the creme de la creme of Fuji build quality, and although earlier examples were made in Japan and the new ones are made in the Philippines, I don't believe there is actually any difference in build quality between either lens. So I have the newer Philippine version, and having compared it to a friend's Japanese version, they look and feel identical. Lastly, we have the focal length. So being a 16mm, you get an extra 2mm on the wide end, which actually comes in unbelievably handy, as 24 to 28mm is a very significant jump, and the extra wide is really, really nice. The extra 5mm on the other end isn't as important, but it's still nice to have when using it as a portrait lens, which it is excellent at too. The bokeh performance is sensational, and at 55mm at 2.8, you get a decent bit of blurred background action too. Obviously, this isn't going to replace like a 50-1.0, but at the end of the day, like the title of the video says, this is if you can only have one lens, and you really want a lens that is going to be as versatile as possible, and that's exactly what this thing is. It's sharp as hell, wide open, and you don't need to worry about stopping it down to f4, for example, because you might worry that at 2.8 it might be a bit soft. At 2.8, it's just as sharp as it is pretty much all the way throughout the aperture range. The overall image quality is just mwah. I feel like zooms typically have this lack of sharpness that makes it obvious that it was a zoom, but this 16-55 is just optically so sweet, it's awesome. I never feel like I am sacrificing anything or making any compromises when shooting with this lens versus my primes, but I will say that for stuff like nightclub photography, I still vastly prefer the 18-1.4, as that extra aperture is really crucial in dark environments. Also, the size difference makes it a little bit less cumbersome too, but then there are times where I wish I had the flexibility with my focal range and I just have to live without it. The amount of time saved on a shoot not needlessly changing lenses is actually huge, and it really helps you focus on just taking photos, especially in situations where you might not actually have time to switch lenses, like during a wedding or a really busy event. Now, let's talk about what isn't so good with this lens. So, a lack of IS. I really wish that this lens had image stabilization in it, as if it did, it would just cap off its achievements as being the most incredible video lens for Fuji. But unfortunately, lacking IS also means that using this lens on older non-IBIS Fuji bodies is not as nice of an experience as it could be. But I hear it's because of sizing constraints they couldn't get it done, so I'm not sure. Perhaps in version 2 they might add it in. Next up, it's not major, but I do wish that this lens zoomed internally rather than externally, as it does make using it on a gimbal a little bit finicky. But if you balance it with the weight sort of set in the middle of the zoom rate, around the 35 mark, it seems to be okay. Also, the zooming function might suck dust into the camera, but I personally haven't experienced this. Then there's the size. So I know what they say, size is everything, but the short and stout nature of the Sigma definitely is that lens's biggest achievement. It's absolutely tiny and subsequently very easy to carry with you anywhere and use as a travel lens. The massive hog that is the 16-55 is huge. And the only lens that I have which is bigger, at least for Fuji, is the grapefruit of glass that is the 51.0, as you can see. So its size means that unfortunately using this lens on smaller Fuji bodies like the XT or the XE line is probably going to be a nightmare. On the XH2S, it feels right at home, and on the XT5, as long as you have an accessory grip, it really isn't an issue either. And also, while the lens isn't as light as the Sigma, it actually isn't that heavy. So it weighs 655 grams, which is nearly 200 grams lighter than the gigantic 51.0. And while it's still heavier than a handful of f2 primes in your bag, the convenience factor of not needing to worry about which prime to use, and also getting a really nice wide angle lens in the package too, is really lovely. And as a professional photographer, I can tell you that this lens has been my absolute moneymaker for the duration that I've had it. From shooting clothing lookbooks to doing artist press shots and filming these very videos, this lens does not skip a beat, and I use it daily. It's definitely become my most used Fuji lens. But what about the 18-55 Fuji zoom? Is that a good alternative? Well, it's certainly a fine lens. I had that a very long time ago. I don't have too much experience with it. From samples, I would say that the 16-55 is noticeably better. It's also noticeably a lot more expensive, but I think if I was shooting video and I couldn't afford this lens, I probably would go for the 18-55 just because it does have that OIS as well, which would be great for like walking and just for, you know, handheld shots. If you just shoot photos, however, and you want something really small and compact and you don't care for the aperturing, the Sigma 18-50 could be right up your alley. It is a very good lens. I don't want anyone to think that I'm slandering it or anything. I think it's like from an engineering standpoint, it's very impressive that Sigma were able to basically make a lens almost the same specs as this, but half its size. Constant 2.8 aperture with a lens that's that small is unbelievable, but it just didn't work for me at all. And yeah, I think if you shoot video, definitely avoid that lens, but if you just shoot photo, go for it. And yes, this lens really isn't that interesting. The 16-55 does everything you could want a lens to do. It does it well, and it doesn't complain about it. It's an honest lens, not showy or flash, but it's aware of how good it is. It wears that red badge proudly. It's not the exciting 51.0 with its insane aperture value or the iconic 90 f2, but it's a lens that gets the job done. And I absolutely believe it's the only lens you'd ever really need. Primes are fun, I love them, I won't be getting rid of them, but if I had to pick just one lens, I would be hard pressed not picking this one. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Have a lovely day.